The killer wore a sack over his head, but he wasn't hiding. He was performing. In the town that dreaded sundown, terror arrives without warning, just headlights cutting through the dark, a trumpet echoing in the woods, and blood on a lover's lane. But what if the most terrifying part wasn't what the camera showed but what it dared not say? Released in 1976 and framed like a true crime dramatization, this horror semi-documentary blurred the line between reenactment and exploitation, turning a real unsolved murder spree into a cult slasher classic. Set in Texarkana, the very town where the original killings occurred, the film opens with the chilling voice of a narrator claiming, "This is a true story." And then the horror begins again. But here's what most viewers never knew. The killer's mask matched witness sketches too closely. The victims' names were changed, but not enough to avoid lawsuits. And some of the town's officials in the movie? They were real people playing versions of themselves. While residents just outside the frame were still living with trauma the film barely disguised. Director Charles B. Pierce, best known for The Legend of Boggy Creek, claimed he made the film to warn people. But the real reason might be stranger. A local cop even accused the production of interfering with ongoing investigations. Others believed Pierce knew more than he admitted. This wasn't just another regional horror flick. This was a movie that poked a town's open wound, then rolled camera. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about the town that dreaded sundown. 1976. Fact shown. The first voice you hear was real. Before the film shows a single face, it gives you a voice. Grave, confident, and matter-of-fact. Texarkana, Texas. A quiet town that became a place of terror. The narrator sets the tone like a courtroom coroner. What most people don't know is that this wasn't a voice actor, it was Vern Stearman, a real documentary narrator, best known for his work on The Legend of Boggy Creek. Director Charles B. Pierce didn't want a horror tone, he wanted the voice of authority, someone who sounded like they were presenting archived footage to a jury. And so he brought back Stearman, whose calm delivery gave even the most violent scenes a false sense of historical accuracy. This choice blurred fact and fiction from the very first second. To locals in Texarkana, it didn't feel like a horror film. It felt like someone reopening old files with intent. The irony? Stearman himself later admitted that he'd been given no context about the real crimes. He thought he was narrating a mockumentary. Instead, his voice became the most trusted part of a deeply polarizing movie. Fact #2. The first victim was based on a real girl who survived. The film's first attack is sudden. A young couple on a lover's lane, headlights cutting through silence, then a masked figure emerging from the trees. What the audience doesn't know is that this opening mirrors almost beat for beat the real attack on Mary Jean Larry, one of the first victims of the Texarkana Moonlight murders. In the real event, Mary Jean and her boyfriend were dragged from their car. She was beaten, assaulted, and left for dead, but survived. In the film, her ordeal is toned down, but the beats are still unmistakable. The horn honking, the mask, the flashlight in the eyes. What's disturbing is that Mary Jean was still alive when the film premiered. She never gave consent, and according to local papers, she was deeply disturbed by how closely her trauma had been dramatized for public entertainment. This wasn't a dramatization, it was a reenactment filmed in her backyard. Fact #3. The killer's mask was too accurate for comfort. When the Phantom Killer appears on screen, he doesn't snarl or speak, he breathes, and he watches. But what unsettled many locals wasn't his actions, it was his look. The killer wears a white sack with eye holes, crude and faceless. But this wasn't a horror invention. It was taken directly from eyewitness reports of the real Phantom Killer, who wore a similar disguise during his crime. The similarity was so close that local police at the time reportedly reopened their investigation, worried that someone connected to the original case had leaked confidential details. Even more troubling, one retired officer accused the production of consulting sources they shouldn't have had access to. No charges were filed, but the resemblance remained. In a town still haunted by unsolved murders, the mask on screen felt less like a costume and more like a confession. Fact #4. The second attack matched a police file word for word. The second on-screen attack in the Town That Dreaded Sundown is even more brutal than the first. A young couple is ambushed in a parked car, and the killer doesn't just assault them, he stages them. One is found tied to a tree. The other is mutilated beyond recognition. The shock for local viewers wasn't the violence, it was the specifics. These details weren't invented, they were lifted almost word for word from police reports, dated the 24th of March 1946. One officer even noted, "They used language only we used internally to describe the crime scene." The theory? Someone on the production team either had access to sealed files or knew someone who did. Worse, the surviving families weren't notified. The shock of seeing their loved ones' fates portrayed with such precision on a drive-in screen led to public protests and calls for censorship. For a horror film, it felt too researched. For a documentary, it felt too cruel. Fact #5. The film accidentally caught real crime scenes in the background. While filming reenactments in wooded areas near Texarkana, the production used real rural roads, barns, and access points that hadn't changed since the 1940 seconds. What they didn't realize is that some of these locations were still part of active investigations. In fact, one abandoned shed shown briefly in a tracking shot had been taped off by law enforcement just months earlier for unrelated criminal activity. Locals later identified it as the site of a real double homicide that had eerie similarities to the original Phantom attacks. When police questioned the crew, they denied any knowledge, but afterward, the area was quietly removed from all future publicity material. It's now considered one of several accidental crime overlaps in the film. They set out to recreate old terror. They ended up filming in the middle of new one. Fact #6. Lone Wolf Morales was a real man, but he wasn't like this. Enter Captain J.D. Morales, the hard-nosed Texas Ranger nicknamed Lone Wolf, introduced with bravado, trench coat, and a classic lawman scowl. He's the film's central hero, brought in to stop the madness. But here's the strange truth, he was real. The actual ranger's name was Manuel Lone Wolf Gonzalez, a legendary figure in Texas law enforcement. And yet, the film changed his name, race, and personality entirely. Why? Because Gonzalez was Hispanic, outspoken, and highly controversial at the time. The filmmakers feared backlash or unwanted attention, so they sanitized him into a quiet, all-American archetype. Even stranger, the real Gonzalez was still alive when the movie premiered, and according to one interview, he never gave permission for his likeness to be used. He simply said, "They borrowed the legend, not the man." Hollywood wanted a cowboy. History had given them something more complicated. Fact #7. The forest chase was shot without permits, and it shows. One of the most intense sequences in the film is a nighttime chase through dense woods. The killer fleeing flashlight beams, officers shouting commands, branches whipping past the camera. The whole thing feels uncontrolled because it was. Director Charles B. Pierce reportedly shot the entire scene without permits, using public land and a skeleton crew. The actors were told to just run and avoid certain flagged trees. No stunt doubles, no lighting rigs, just raw, handheld chaos. The result? Multiple injuries. One actor tripped on a root and broke 2 ribs. Another had to get tetanus shots after falling into barbed wire. But Pierce refused to reshoot. "It felt real," he said, "like you were there, and something had gone very wrong." He was right, but not in the way he meant. Fact #8. The trumpet murder was based on a rumor no one could prove. In one of the film's strangest and most unsettling scenes, the killer ties a woman to a tree and uses a trumpet as a murder weapon, attaching a knife to the mouthpiece and mimicking a musician playing his final note. It's surreal, almost theatrical, and many assumed it was pure invention. But here's the twist. The idea came from a real rumor whispered among investigators in 1946. One version of the report claimed that a witness heard trumpet sounds before discovering the victim. Another theory suggested the killer was once a band member and that the attack was symbolic revenge. None of this was ever proven. No trumpet was found at the crime scene, and yet Pierce built an entire kill scene around it, blending folklore, speculation, and slasher brutality. It wasn't a reenactment. It was mythology pretending to be fact, and audiences couldn't tell the difference. Fact #9. Texarkana locked their doors for the first time in decades. As the phantom spree escalates in the film, Texarkana descends into paranoia. Citizens buy guns, curfews are enforced, couples abandon lovers' lanes. It seems exaggerated until you realize it actually happened. In 1946, during the real Moonlight murders, Texarkana became a town under siege. Hardware stores sold out of locks, chains, and window bars. Gun sales spiked by 500% in a week. The sheriff instituted a 9 p.m. curfew. Police patrolled high school dances. Some families sent their children to live in other states. When Pierce recreated these scenes, he didn't need to write dialogue, he just copied headlines from old newspapers. And the most chilling part? When the film premiered 30 years later, Texarkana locked its doors again, this time not out of fear of the killer, but of the memories coming back to life. Fact Hassan 0. The real cops had a suspect, but the film couldn't say his name. In the second half of the film, the Texas Rangers struggle to identify the Phantom Killer. They arrest drunks, interrogate loners, and follow shaky leads, but nothing sticks. In reality, the case was exactly that frustrating. But there's a detail the movie tiptoes around. By 1947, local law enforcement had a prime suspect, a man with prior offenses, connections to the crime scenes, and a suspicious disappearance. But he was never publicly named, and prosecutors dropped the case due to lack of evidence. When Pierce's team consulted local police for the film, they were reportedly told to stay vague. The Phantom had never been caught, and naming names could lead to lawsuits or worse, public panic. So the film dodges the truth in plain sight, using vague composites and red herrings to blur what locals already suspected. The man they believed did it was still alive when the movie hit theaters. Fact Hassan. The daylight murder was an act of defiance. Most slasher films play it safe at night, but in the Town That Dreaded Sundown, one of the most brutal scenes happens in broad daylight. A woman walks home alone. The killer follows casually. The sun is shining. The scream is stifled. This scene rattled audiences, and it was no accident. Charles B. Pierce deliberately chose a well-known Texarkana street, used natural lighting, and let locals watch filming from a distance. He wanted to prove something, that horror doesn't need shadows, that fear can bloom in the ordinary. And some say it was also a direct shot at city officials who tried to halt production weeks earlier. He didn't just film in their town, he filmed their trauma under the Sunday. Fact Hassan 2. The train scene was shot in one take and almost went wrong. In one of the most cinematic moments in the film, the Phantom Killer is nearly spotted near a train crossing. The camera tracks his movement as an engine roars past, briefly obscuring his figure. When the train clears, he's gone. The scene plays like choreography, and that's because it had to be. Pierce only had one shot to get it right. The train was on an active schedule, the track was live, and the production had just 7 minutes of clearance. Crew members were positioned with walkie-talkies. The actor playing the Phantom wore heavy clothing in the heat. The cameraman had to lie prone on a dolly track parallel to the rails. But here's the kicker. The first take was ruined by a passing bird. The train was recalled. The crew had one last chance before losing the location. That second take, the one you see in the final cut, was done in complete silence on set. And it worked. The killer vanished into legend. The crew almost didn't make it out at all. Fact Hassan 3. The final chase was edited to hide a stunt that went wrong. In the climactic chase through a cotton field, officers close in on the Phantom Killer, gunshots echo, and the stalker limps into the brush. It feels fast, desperate, disorienting, just like Panic should. But buried in those frantic cuts is a real accident. During one take, the actor playing Morales fired a blank too close to a crew member, temporarily damaging the boom operator's hearing. In another, a stunt double tripped over irrigation lines, dislocating his shoulder. Rather than scrap the sequence, Pierce chose to cut around the injuries, adding shaky handheld footage and extra dust effects to mask the chaos. The result feels raw because it was. You're not watching a choreographed takedown. You're watching a crew desperately trying to salvage a scene collapsing in real time. Fact Hassan 4. The ending was a gamble that nobody approved. The film ends not with closure, but with a man standing in line at a movie theater, his face hidden, the camera lingering. Is it the Phantom? A copycat? A survivor? No answers, just unease. Here's what most don't know. That ending wasn't in the script. Pierce added it during post-production, after test audiences called the original ending too hopeful. The studio didn't approve the change. The real police department hated it, and Texarkana officials accused the film of turning a community wound into a cheap twist. But the director stood firm. People don't want justice, he said. They want something to fear after the credits roll. He gave them exactly that, and made sure the fear kept walking among them. Fact Hassan 5. Texarkana tried to ban the film, then screened it every year. When the film premiered in 1976, Texarkana exploded with anger. Local newspapers ran headlines like, "This isn't entertainment, it's exploitation." Survivors of the real attacks refused to speak to reporters. One family even threatened legal action. City officials attempted to block future screenings. Churches denounced it from the pulpit. But then something strange happened. Years later, the town began holding annual outdoor screenings of the film at Spring Lake Park, just minutes from where the original attacks occurred. It became a tradition, a ritual, a restaging of fear under the open sky. Some say it was about reclaiming trauma. Others say it was about forgetting it by watching it over and over again until it felt like fiction. Either way, the film they once tried to bury became part of their story. Fact-Onyx. Charles B. Pierce shot scenes without a script. Director Charles B. Pierce wasn't a studio-trained filmmaker. He didn't work with storyboards. For much of the Town That Dreaded Sundown, he didn't even use a complete script. According to the assistant director, many scenes were shot with just a one-paragraph outline written on napkins, scratch paper, or hotel stationery. Pierce would walk onto set, assign lines on the spot, and shout instructions like, "Just react like you're really dying." This guerrilla style added urgency, but it also led to continuity errors, frustrated actors, and a lawsuit threat from the editor, who said, "He gave me chaos in reels and expected suspense in return." Still, Pierce got what he wanted, a film that felt rough, raw, and uncomfortably real, because it was made without a safety net. Fact-7. A victim's family threatened to burn the reel. One of the most disturbing confrontations around the film didn't happen on camera, it happened in a courtroom hallway. According to legal documents filed in 1977, a family member of one of the real-life victims threatened to physically destroy the film reel if it was shown in their county. They claimed the film recreated their relative's death without permission, using details only law enforcement and family should have known. Pierce's defense? That the film had changed names, altered locations, and thus fell under fictionalized representation. The case never went to trial, but the story leaked and several Texas drive-ins quietly pulled the movie from their schedules. The family never gave a follow-up statement, but the rumor remained some prints of the film were destroyed in silence. Fact-8. A deleted scene was said to be too accurate to air. There's a scene missing from most versions of the film, one that shows the Phantom Killer watching police officers from a distance, studying their routines from behind a tree line. The scene was shot. It was edited. It was even mentioned in early promotional materials, but it never made the final cut. Why? According to a former crew member, the scene too closely mirrored an actual police report from April 1946, in which an officer claimed to feel eyes on him from the trees and later found footprints leading away from a patrol post. Local law enforcement allegedly pressured Pierce to cut the scene, fearing it would reignite conspiracy theories that the Phantom had military or police training. That footage has never resurfaced, but the implication it left behind still lingers. Fact-9. The film secretly connects to the legend of Boggy Creek. Before he made The Town That Dreaded Sundown, Charles B. Pierce became famous for another true story thriller, The Legend of Boggy Creek, 1972. That film, too, mixed fact with folklore. But few noticed how deeply the two films are connected. Several actors from Boggy Creek appear in Sundown, sometimes playing victims, sometimes townspeople. Even more interesting, the same costumer, same lighting rigs, and same backwoods shooting locations were used. Some theorists believe Sundown was meant to be a spiritual sequel, moving from cryptid horror to real-life slasher terror, while using the same techniques to fabricate truth. Boggy Creek made Pierce famous. Sundown made him infamous. Together, they built a myth of Southern Gothic horror. Fact-20. The original idea came from a lost manuscript. In interviews, Pierce claimed he got the idea for the film from news clippings, police reports, and barroom stories. But a lesser-known truth is that the original concept came from an unpublished manuscript written by a local journalist who had covered the 1,946 murders. The manuscript, titled Phantom in the Pines, was passed around among true crime collectors, but never saw release, likely due to legal threats. Pierce reportedly read the manuscript in secret, then adapted several scenes and quotes directly into the film without credit. To this day, the full text of Phantom in the Pines has never been made public. Some say it was destroyed. Others say it's still hidden because it names someone the police never charged. Bonus fact: the Phantom was never caught, but he may have seen the film. In the final credits of The Town That Dreaded Sundown, the narrator solemnly repeats, "The killer has never been found." It sounds like a horror tagline, but it's not. It's a legal disclaimer, because by 1976, the man suspected of being the Phantom Killer was still alive, possibly even still living in or near Texarkana. One retired officer told a reporter in 1978, if he's still out there, he definitely saw the movie. There were rumors. A man in his 50s spotted sitting alone at the premiere, a local mechanic who vanished the week after, even a florist who sent a black bouquet to the mayor after the first public screening. Nothing was ever proven, but survivors and investigators alike found the idea unbearably plausible that the Phantom, after 30 years in the shadows, finally watched the town relive his crimes on a giant outdoor screen. He never needed to confess. He just needed to see how well they remembered. Which of these facts left the biggest mark on you? Was it the recreated murders, the masked figure drawn too precisely from real life, or the rumor that the Phantom himself watched it all unfold from the crowd? Tell us in the comments what you think. Was this film a warning, a violation, or something the town was never supposed to survive twice? And if there's another film you want us to pull apart, piece by buried piece, drop the title below. We'll be watching, even after sundown.